very much. It's greatly appreciated. I'm very pleased to be here at a wonderful event and a very good series of keynote addresses. So we're very pleased to follow. As the title mentions, I'm here to discuss a slightly different topic to the last few presentations. One which I think is equally relevant, but unfortunately rather niche in the world of payments and particularly, I would say, trading, given the sensitivity of the sector. As was mentioned in the introduction, my name is William, and I am the CEO of a company called Umrah Cash. At Umrah Cash, we're dedicated to widening financial participation and inclusion in Hajj and Umrah, that is to say, Islamic pilgrimage through Fintech. I'm based between Jeddah in Saudi Arabia and Kano in Nigeria, and have been building Umrah Cash really for the past year and a half, though we've been operational for the past year. And in the series of this presentation, I'm going to not only shed some light as to what we've built and how it works, but the opportunity which is presented by pilgrimage as not only a sector for common good, but also a great opportunity for growth and business expansion, particularly for those fintech companies or even virtual asset providers that are interested in expanding to, I would say, the global south and developing Islamic markets. So just to give an overview of really where we're building and what we're working, which is what is Hajj and Umrah? What defines Islamic pilgrimage? Now, I know for many of you this is probably common knowledge, and indeed, even if you're not a Muslim, you'll likely be familiar with both Hajj and Umrah. But just at a very high level, Hajj and Umrah refers to the two kinds of Islamic pilgrimage. Hajj being the major, occurring for approximately 1 week every year. This year it's in June. And Umrah being the minor pilgrimage, which is, occurs throughout the year and is undertaken by Muslims, notwithstanding their obligations in Hajj, which is the major pilgrimage. As we can see, it holds significant religious importance for Muslims. Hajj, of course, is an obligation as far as they're able for every Muslim to attend. And this, I think, is what makes it so interesting from a business perspective, because there are few other events in the world that draw so many people to a single place at a concentrated, select time period. As I mentioned, Hajj in particular occurs during approximately 1 week every year. We've seen, particularly given Saudi's expansion and opening to the world, that the numbers of pilgrims are increasing. So 36 million pilgrims, whether for Hajj or Umrah, visit Mecca and Medina every year. This number is set to reach 50 million by 2030. This incorporates pilgrims from 144 countries. It's a significant number from a significant different markets. And we can see that the majority of pilgrims are from developing countries, primarily those in Asia, the Middle East, Africa, with a much smaller portion in Europe. And again, this is why I'm particularly interested in building in this sector and would advocate that we pay attention to it. Because unlike, say, conventional fintech consumers or participants in North America or Europe, this is a very different market with very different requirements. We can already see that by the geographic spread, and indeed the fact that the majority of pilgrims are from developing countries. And of course, as we might all have seen or probably have seen, Saudi is probably the best place to be building in the region. Although the UAE has led the sector, particularly in fintech, for a long time, I think there's really no better place, and indeed no better time, to be building than in Saudi Arabia and now. With a renewed appetite to fintech in preparation for Vision 2030, a serious number of digitization and digital government initiatives, we see a fantastic opportunity in the kingdom, primarily within Hajj and Umrah and within pilgrimage. As part of the non-cash smart solution initiatives that exist, there are significant subsidies, grants, and backing, ultimately, for digital payments within pilgrimage. So something which I think is seriously worth considering for anyone which is building in the space or has an interest in the market. But I think first, beyond what's already obvious, we have to define what do we mean by fintech or financial solutions within the context of pilgrimage. And I think it's worth pointing out that we need to start from the basics here. As I mentioned, the majority of pilgrims are from developing countries. The level of financial literacy is relatively low, and the exposure to complex technologies is virtually non-existent. And so we have to go back to first principles, such that when we talk about digital finance or fintech, we mean very basic mobile wallets, digital payments of the most ordinary kind, that is to say, sending and receiving, and more specifically, cashless transfers. That is to say, how do we implement the idea of digital money to pilgrims at the lowest level? And I think the other key thing here is to point out that when we talk about fintech in the context of Hajj, it's naturally a sensitive sector. So it's not crypto, it's not digital assets. It is very simply the ability to send and receive money without sending and receiving money. So I would say the real cornerstone of fintech as we commonly understand it. But the question is, what is the need? Because as we've discussed, we have an excess of 30 million pilgrims visiting the kingdom every year, and clearly they get by. They're able to pay for their flight tickets, subsist, survive, spend money, and come home. But the reality is that for many pilgrims, particularly those from developing countries, there are serious issues with respect to currency and access to Saudi riyals in Saudi. If we look, for example, at West Africa, specifically Nigeria, South Asia, we see this in Pakistan and to a lesser extent in Bangladesh, it's extremely difficult to access FX. The ability to buy dollars locally often occurs through the black market, the price is inflated, and then when the pilgrims arrive in Jeddah or Medina, they often then have to exchange out of dollars into riyals. And so naturally, they're losing twice. They pay a lot for the dollars in their home country, and then they pay a lot or lose a lot when they exchange those dollars for riyals in Saudi. And this is because of those capital controls which I mentioned. Many countries simply don't have the foreign exchange available. And the final point to mention is that in Saudi, despite the opening and the appetite for fintech, there are still very severe restrictions when it comes to who can actually access existing digital wallets. We look at SDC Pay, we look at Digital 360, even virtual accounts with the existing Tier 1 banks. Unless you have an Iqama, which is a Saudi residency permit, or you're a Saudi national, it's impossible to access any of them. So if you enter the country on an Umrah or a Hajj visa, or even a business visa, you are excluded from conventional fintech products. And so the problem then arises that on the one hand, we have a huge need and a huge movement of people, but on the other hand, there are no, we might say, sustainable or widespread solutions to cater to them from a financial perspective. And as we mentioned in the second slide, we see that Saudi is now pushing towards cashless solutions. Digital payments, smart payments is how they describe it. And yet we have up to 30 million pilgrims arriving at Jeddah and Medina airport with huge bags of cash, local currency, many of them get stopped, cash is seized, etc. But the reason for this is not because of any malevolence or malicious activity, but simply because for many pilgrims there is no way of transporting money otherwise. It has to be cash. And indeed, we see this through the life journey or the customer cycle, we might say, of many al-Hajjis visiting Saudi. They bring large volumes of physical cash, they're forced to buy riyals locally at hugely inflated prices, or they risk their money through hawala networks, which are not only illegal in Saudi, but also expose their money to a huge amount of risk. Now, for those who have been on Hajj or Umrah previously, you may be familiar with Nusuk, which is an existing Saudi platform that attempts to cater to effectively digital solutions for pilgrims. If you download the Nusuk application now, you see there's a number of functionalities, the ability to book router permits, to arrange transport, to see train timings, etc. And about a year ago, they introduced a pilot for a Nusuk digital wallet. The idea being that they would be able to collect payments in a pilgrim's home country and then issue them with a digital card, which would allow them to spend in Saudi. The problem was that the Nusuk digital wallet served only Tier 1 banking areas. So naturally, pilgrims from North America, pilgrims from Europe, certain parts of Southeast Asia were able to access the Nusuk wallet. But the trouble is those visitors already have Revolut cards, TransferWise, Monzo, etc., etc. And so naturally, there was no great use case, there was no great uptake. Whereas we have pilgrims from Nigeria, Niger Republic, Pakistan, Bangladesh, who don't have access to currency cards or many of the FX-driven digital banking or neobanks that we see elsewhere. And they, as a result, were excluded from the Nusuk wallet. And so what we saw, therefore, was that this very good initiative from the Saudi government, the Ministry of Hajj specifically, was rendered effectively ineffective because it was, as we see, over-centralized. It required input and registration through Saudi rather than in pilgrims' home countries. It was technologically demanding. That is to say, it required the latest iOS version, so it was primarily almost Apple only, which of course doesn't suit the majority of pilgrims from emerging markets. And it was socioeconomically ignorant. That is to say, it required Apple Pay or a Visa or MasterCard to top up. And if you have access to a Visa or a MasterCard, particularly one that can process foreign exchange transactions, you don't need to be using Nusuk. You can simply arrive and pay in Saudi. So it was largely ineffective. And so what we see, therefore, is not only do we need a solution, but we can now judge how that solution has to look. The first thing to point out, which is largely why the Nusuk wallet failed, is that any application or digital platform that seeks to include and incorporate and digitize pilgrims and their money has to be comfortable for them. It has to abide with existing ways of transacting, existing ways of working. If, for example, pilgrims are not used to making bank transfers, but instead prefer to use mobile money or cash deposits in their home country, then the platform has to cater to that. It's very difficult to teach an old dog new tricks, and it's the same when it comes to consumer behavior. You can't expect them to teach themselves a new platform or new technology, particularly not when it's an activity which is as sensitive as Hajj or Umrah. Secondly, it has to be extremely basic. It has to cater to every level of the technological spectrum. If you have a USSD feature phone, then you should be able to use the application, albeit in a very different way to someone that has the latest iPhone. But the two are not mutually exclusive. We see, for example, from the likes of M-Pesa in Kenya or even bKash in Bangladesh, that there are ways to expand the remit, we might say, of basic digital financial platforms. And the last point is that it cannot be executed centrally. Or at the very least, it can be based and built centrally, but there has to be a level of devolution, insofar as it's important that any application or platform is usable by pilgrims in their home country. Because for the majority of, particularly pilgrims on Hajj, they've got no interaction with Saudi outside of their first visit. It's not possible for them to register a phone number or open accounts or registered addresses prior to visiting. So it has to tick all of these boxes in one way or another. So this is why we built Umrah Cash. Umrah Cash is headquartered in Jeddah with offices in Kano, Nigeria, Abuja, again Nigeria, and Jakarta in Indonesia. We're pioneering the model that I just described, which is Saudi-based but internationally operative fintech, which enables the lowest common denominator of tech and financial literacy to be able to access digital finance. The way that Umrah Cash works is very simple. It's a digital application supported by a range of offices and agents which are on ground, operational in Islamic and pilgrimage communities in Nigeria and Indonesia. Those are our two initial target markets. We're able to collect payments either digitally or via cash in the pilgrim's home country. So in Nigeria, for example, a pilgrim will visit our office in Kano. They will give us cash, and we will then credit their digital wallet. Their digital wallet is accessible either through USSD if they have a feature phone, or via Android or iOS if they have a smartphone. Upon receiving their local currency, we credit them with Saudi riyals. So as soon as they pay us, they have access to Saudi riyals in their wallet. The rate is fixed, so the rate they see is the rate they get. And for many pilgrims, particularly in Nigeria, for example, where we see the naira moves 10 to 20 points in an hour, this is very comforting for them. And we see more and more that pilgrims use Umrah Cash almost like a savings product, whereby they know they'll be going on Umrah in 2 months, so they will deposit 50K, 100K naira every week or every 2 weeks, thereby hedging themselves against the deflation of the local currency. Once the pilgrim has riyals in their wallet, Saudi local currency, they arrive in Saudi, and they typically start in either Medina or Mecca. And when they land, they're able to contact one of our agents or one of our offices through the application. We have employees in Mecca, Medina, Jeddah, and Riyadh, such that when pilgrims arrive, they're able to contact the one which is closest to them, and upon visiting, the agent are able to withdraw the money into physical cash. Our agents have daily liquidity. They've got large volumes of Riyal cash available at all times, such that when a pilgrim arrives, the agent is able to remotely debit their wallet and pay out physical cash, thereby completing the exchange process. And the way that this works on the back end is that we are able to hold liquidity through a series of liquidity pools. I describe this almost as like a digital hawala, insofar as there's a lot of volume going into Saudi through the pilgrimage routes, which I've described, but there is simultaneously a lot of money moving out. If we look at the Hajj operators, the pilgrimage aggregators, and even the Saudi operational companies, they have huge needs to settle payments in places like Nigeria, in Pakistan, in Indonesia, and Bangladesh, but naturally don't have access to the accounts to do so. So that's why we're able to collect riyals from them. We'll settle payments on their behalf abroad, and those riyals we collect, we pay out to pilgrims in Mecca and Medina. And the important thing, or at least the unique factor, I think, about Umrah Cash is that we are entirely localized and, I would say, conscious of nationality and culture. Whenever we open in a new country, so in Nigeria or alternatively in Indonesia, we onboard agents in Mecca and Medina who speak the local language of those pilgrims, who operate in and around the hotels used by those pilgrims, and are effectively customer support as much as they are agents to handhold the user through every stage of the digital process, notwithstanding their knowledge or expertise. And I'll just skip through this briefly, but this gives an insight into the interface as to how Umrah Cash works. Ultimately, it's very simple. You open the application, again available either smartphone or feature phone on demand. You can pay electronically through local payment providers or alternatively via cash at one of our offices. You're credited with Saudi riyals, and then when you reach the kingdom, you will find one of our agents, contact them, meet them, withdraw the cash, and receive it face-to-face. And each version of the application, all within one app, of course, but each version is tailored to an individual nationality. So for Nigerians, they will see Hausa, typically agents. Indonesians will see Indonesian agents and so forth, such that it's an entirely localized and culturally sensitive exercise, which again is very necessary given the sensitivity of pilgrimage. So I'm coming to the end of my time slot, and I don't want to bore you any longer. But I think just to wrap up and give a summary, really, as to what the key takeaways are, not only as to what we've built at Umrah Cash, but I think the opportunity presented by pilgrimage, Hajj, Umrah, and financial technology more broadly. So we can see, and I don't think this is any secret, but digital finance is an essential part, not only of Vision 2030 and the Saudi development goals, but of international finance going forward. And so naturally, the question is how do we integrate that and these goals and the importance of digital finance with a sector which is naturally very conservative? As we've said, cultural sensitivity is very important. What are the preferences and behaviors of individual pilgrims dependent on their country of origin? Technological sensitivity is another, which is how do you cater or develop a solution which is on the one hand applicable to a software engineer, and on the other hand to someone who doesn't have a smartphone. And then drawing those two together, how do we implement it locally? That is to say, how can we integrate with the grassroots, with consumer behavior and preferences to actually onboard users? When Nusuk, for example, tried to roll out their wallets, it was controlled exclusively from Jeddah. There was no penetration in places like Nigeria, Pakistan, Bangladesh. It was extremely limited because there wasn't that grassroots synthesis. And this leads to what we see on the left-hand side of the screen, which is it breeds universal accessibility. It creates a system of easy onboarding. And through these things, or through these factors, should hopefully drive widespread adoption. So I'll wrap up there. Thank you very much for the time, for the attention. Please do look up Umrah Cash, and you can see more details about what we've built. But our platform aside, Hajj and Umrah, in my view, is the future of regional fintech and something which I think is worth paying attention to. So thank you again. It's much appreciated, and hope to meet a few of you. Thank you.